Well, as is customary at the University of Calgary, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories, I should say, of the people of the Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Good morning from Calgary, good morning, Canada, and welcome to our event, The Business of Hydrogen, a focus on Canada and Germany, jointly organized by the University of Calgary and Borden Ladner Gervais. My name is Rudiger Cherning. I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Law, where I research and teach in the areas of international and Canadian energy and natural resources law, all within the research themes of clean energy and related infrastructure and projects, including today's topic of hydrogen, natural gas, renewables, and nuclear. My co-moderator, Jonathan Cocker, is partner of the law firm Borden Ladner Gervais, specializing in environmental markets, including renewable energy, alternative fuels, resource recovery, and related credit markets. Jonathan is also a guest lecturer in my alternative energy law, where we initially electrolyzed the idea for today's event. So thank you, Jonathan, and to Borden Ladner Gervais for your continued support. I had to get that in there. I'd like to take just a few moments for housekeeping, if I may. Our webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you after. The chat function has also been enabled, and to keep our session as interactive as possible, there will be no formal Q&A session, so we invite you to please post your questions in the chat function, which your moderators will be monitoring. I'd also like to thank those of you who have helped promote today's event, including the German Embassy in Ottawa, as well as the Oil, Gas and Energy Law Journal. If you are interested in reading more about the global hydrogen economy as it is emerging, you will find the journal's very recent special issue on hydrogen of interest. After brief opening remarks, Jonathan will introduce our panel members for today, and then we'll get going on the panel. And with this, I'd like to extend a very special welcome to Dr. Hubertus Liebrecht, the Honorary Consul of the Federal Republic of Germany in Calgary, for his opening remarks. We are delighted that you could join us. Herzlichen Dank. And the Zoom floor, so to speak, is yours.
Thank you, Rudiger. I just wanted to take the opportunity to express the appreciation for this kind of event. Hydrogen is a very high ranking topic for the German government, all areas of that explicitly, and we have several intense meetings on the government side with the provincial and the federal government currently about how to improve cooperation on hydrogen. So as such, Rudiger, I really appreciate your initiative here and what you have accomplished so far. I want to wish you all a very interesting and informative webinar, and looking forward to learn more about the topic while I'm listening.
May I introduce our fabulous international panel of experts in hydrogen and the hydrogen transition. We first have Kirsten Westphal, who's a senior associate at SWP, the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin. SWP provides analysis on foreign policy issues, not only to the Bundestag and the German federal government, but also to industry stakeholders. At SWP, she heads up the project Geopolitics of Energy Transition Hydrogen, which is funded by the Federal Foreign Office. Dr. Westphal is a member of the German Hydrogen Council and is based in Berlin. Welcome, Kirsten. Next, we have Bruno Forget, who is the Director of Global Business Development and Sales for Hydrogen Technologies for Cummins, a world leader in fuel cell and hydrogen technologies with operations in both Germany and Canada. He's been involved in many international project developments, including the HYPE Paris taxis and the STNE logistics truck transition in Shanghai. He was involved in the development of a joint venture for HRS manufacturing in China, as well as hydrogen projects in the transit space, including for BC Transit, for Walmart, and for Carrefour France. Bruno is based in Belgium. Welcome, Bruno. Third, we have Petra Dolata, who's an associate professor at the University of Calgary and former Canada Research Chair in the History of Energy. She's the co-convener for the Energy and Society Research Group at the Calgary Institute for the Humanities. where she is also a scholar in residence with a project on stories of energy transitions. Petra is based in Calgary. Welcome, Petra. And finally, we have Matthias Lang, who's a partner of the international law firm of Bird & Bird and a member of that firm's energy and utilities sector, as well as its current hydrogen initiative. Mr. Lang is also former chairman of the Oil and Gas Committee and a member of the Council of Energy, Environment and Natural Resources and Infrastructure Law, CERL, of the International Bar Association. Matthias is based in Dusseldorf, Germany. Welcome, Matthias.
Fully aware that Dr. Kirsten Westphal is pressed for time. Perhaps I could move the webinar along and Kirsten, just ask you to perhaps start us off, and then we'll jump back to the introductions when Jonathan rejoins us, with your brief overview, if you could, as to what is happening in Germany at the moment. What should we know here on the Canadian side with regard to the idea of developing the business of hydrogen between Canada and Germany and vice versa?
Thank you so much, Rüdiger, and good to hear that it's John's actually bandwidth, because mine was said to be bad as well. No, great to be with you. I would say there's a lot going on in Germany on hydrogen. I would really see Germany as a front runner. We have issued our national hydrogen strategy last summer. And it's based in a broader context, of course, with the German Energiewende and the phasing out of nuclear power and coal, plus the renewables and electrification issue and sector coupling. Hydrogen is really seen as another centerpiece of the Energiewende, together with energy efficiency, renewables, and so on. Hydrogen is indeed being pushed heavily with the National Hydrogen Strategy. In the long term, it's very clear that public money will be spent for green hydrogen, but it's very probable that in midterm CO2 neutral hydrogen will play a role. And the priorities set in Germany are especially decarbonizing key industrial sectors, so the energy intensive industrial sectors, difficult and hard to abate sectors, plus the transport sector. Hydrogen is also seen, of course, as a means to store energy and to enable sector coupling. And then there's a large debate around heating here in Germany and what to use hydrogen for as well. As every country, I would say, Germany faces this chicken and egg problem. So how to kick off supply and demand, but also transport, how to bring the different pieces together. The idea is, I would say, twofold with regard to supply. We want to develop a strong domestic market for the production. So it's really the idea to expand green hydrogen production as soon as possible by 5 gigawatts till 2030, and then 10 gigawatt by 2035 and 15 by 2040. But it's very well understood that Germany has, of course, constraining factors like the access to land, but also public acceptance. So there's a clear understanding that being an import of energy right now, we will also need to import hydrogen. So Germany is really looking into developing a regional but also an international hydrogen market. The idea is to come up with a commodity market. We have the hydrogen strategy, and the action plan is quite detailed in comparison to other strategies. We have 38 measures identified for the first phase till 2023, how to start the market, and I could say more later. I think what is extremely interesting is that, of course, the German hydrogen strategy has to be seen as a part of the bigger European picture, where we have the European hydrogen strategy as well, and the plan to produce 40 gigawatt by 2030 in the EU, and another 40 gigawatt in the regional, in the neighborhood. So they're looking to North Africa and Ukraine. And this is what I wanted to say, basically that we will see somehow a development in concentric circles from hydrogen valleys to more regional hydrogen supply, but also, of course, looking into the international trade. And then it's really the question, who will be the early and primary partners? And I think we will see existing close partnerships playing out. We will see a partnership with countries that have renewable abundance, but also existing infrastructure. What I equally think will be very important, and this is why I also see Canada really being of high interest for Germany, is that we are talking about common rules and regulations and standards, and the devotion to kicking off a liberalized market. And this means, of course, looking into guarantees of origin, but also certification. And I think it's really important that partners here team up, that share the common view of how a market could work. And looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful, Kirsten. Jonathan, I think you're back.
Thank you very much, and I apologize.
You are welcome.
When I read the national strategy, the German national strategy, it seems to me that the government of Germany will look to fund and source green hydrogen through various mechanisms, regulatory or funding, and then it appears that secondarily, as you say, the government is ultimately looking to rely upon an international hydrogen market. That market means carbon-free voice and blue market. And I wonder, is that a fair assessment? In other words, direct spend on green and direct sourcing temporarily on turquoise.
Kirsten, did we manage to, Jonathan, we're so sorry, but I don't think we caught much of your question.
I think Jonathan pointed to a key point that I also wanted to make. Germany is betting on the development of an international market, because it's precisely one sentence in the strategy that simply a market will develop for blue hydrogen and maybe turquoise hydrogen. And this is, of course, very optimistic. And this is what I meant, that there is a lot still to do for international cooperation bilaterally to really bringing in critical mass of climate neutral, low carbon hydrogen, plus also really looking into governance issues. And this is where again, I see Germany and Canada playing a key role. But I'm not sure whether I picked the question rightly.
So, Kirsten, Jonathan and I have discussed this extensively. There was much excitement early in March, on March 16th, when there was a partnership agreement signed between Canada and Germany. Those of us in the hydrogen play are very excited by a few lines in it. What true potential do you see from a European perspective, for there to be genuine energy collaboration between Canada and Germany on something like hydrogen?
Well, I think I would at least see three factors. First of all, there is lifting off the physical trade of climate neutral, low carbon hydrogen. And this is, Canada is very interesting, of course, due to its potential, both for blue hydrogen, but also for green hydrogen. So this is where both countries already have the experience of LNG trade and contracts. The second point I could think of is thinking of applications, how to use that. And I remember us, Rüdiger, discussing the issue of shipping lines, decarbonizing shipping lines, Arctic lines, shipping lanes. And I think this is really key, because this is also how Germany and the EU now think of how to address and develop hydrogen valleys and infrastructures around. And the third point is, and I mention it again and again, because I really think it's crucial, the talk about guarantees of origin certifications and then establish international governance. And here I also think it's at least two tasks that we're facing. One is really to talk through the criteria and develop this reporting and accounting methodology, but also think about the governance itself, because at the moment I think we have a number of international institutions that are competing which one sets the standards, the norms, and I think here the G7, G20 has to play a key role and pick the winning institution, so to say.
Fantastic.
I wonder, Kirsten, when you look at the strategy, it looks to me as if the priority for Germany outside of its borders is really the EU at first instance, in terms of developing a unified strategy around energy, including hydrogen first, and then broadening out to places beyond its borders, as you say, neighbors, and then ultimately across the shores to places like Australia and Canada. Is that a fair assessment of the strategy?
That's interesting that you have this reading, because sometimes I hear from other European countries really a complaint that Germany is first looking into its international partnerships with Australia, with Chile, with Canada. I think it should be parallel, of course. It should be parallel. I mean, Germany, of course, has to streamline its efforts with the EU, basically because of all the infrastructure that is that we need. But I think indeed it's parallel. Yeah. So you have to, of course, develop the European hydrogen market, and some even say that we have to look into hydrogen union. This is still far away, but I think we also see in parallel really the development of bilateral hydrogen partnerships. And I mentioned Australia, Chile, now Canada. And this is really the way forward.
If I could bring in Dr. Matthias Lang from Berlin Düsseldorf, and with your geographic location in really in the heart of heavy industry Germany, to pick up on what Kirsten, you said in terms of the sectoral coupling, the industrial sectors, the energy intensive industries. What role, Matthias, do you think will play? What role will the coordination of not just infrastructure in Germany, but at a European level play? And what message could that send to potential exporters from Canada down the road, of course, in terms of looking more at a European rather than just a German focus?
Well, the region where Düsseldorf is located is sort of the desk of the Rhine-Ruhr area, which is the old industrial heart of Germany. North Rhine-Westphalia, the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, one of the federal states, has about 30% of the electricity consumption at the moment, and quite a substantial share of the total energy consumption. And while coal mining and steel have basically gone, we have strong chemicals industry, for example, strong consumers of energy. And with all the closures coming around, I mean, the closing of the nuclear power plant, shutting down lignite, hard coal generation, somehow the energy has to go to the places where the consumption is going to take place. Of course, when we look at it from the electrical side, the one thing is building power lines, but we all know that storage of power is not exactly something that we have totally worked out. And I think hydrogen is one of the hopes that we're having, that this is something that can work. And seen together with the consumption, then we have the technical expertise in this area to deal with hydrogen, and also we have infrastructure in place. Going the natural gas pipelines that we currently have, and particularly coming from the Netherlands, that because of changes in the production side, the production quantities there will be able to be used for other things. So there's actually quite a good combination of having the need on the one hand, the ability to deal with it on the other hand, and the infrastructure to make it work. That will, well, people are considering as a good opportunity for hydrogen.
Do you think, Matthias, that the industrial sector is priority one in terms of the German strategy?
Well, is it priority one? I don't know. What I can say is that in all the discussions that I've been had the pleasure of being a part of, the industrial consumption part has played a big role, and the expertise from the industrial sector, electrolyzers, how to do that, what can be done, is there. So people are mindful of that, and one of the beauties of hydrogen is that the laws of physics somehow will ultimately always trump the laws of politics, and you have to find a way how to make it work. And the industrial sector say, yes, we need the power, we need the energy, and somehow it needs to be reliable. And hydrogen is one of the areas where things might actually work.
Bruno, do you have thoughts on where within Germany and perhaps within Europe the priorities may lie around this hydrogen transition?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, the priority is all the sectors, right? But in the hard to electrify sectors, you also find existing case use. And that's where you get the low-hanging fruit to start, really unfolding that energy transition. So coming back to what Matthias just said, I think these are not only you have educated people around the table looking to clean up their act, but they also have existing case use. So in the case of green hydrogen, it's about displacing some gray or fossil-based hydrogen, and it goes a long way to scale up the technology as we go, as we move forward. So I think it's more about these are the first right applications to really scale up things and get going, and from that foundation then start thinking about bigger and more, I would say, complex applications.
Right. And we'll talk about transportation as we go through this session. Rudiger, do you have thoughts from your end? Do you have thoughts on where within the industrial sectors of Canada we may see Germany as a model? We've certainly been hand-wringing on this side of the Atlantic around what to do with our heavy industries. And it appears that Germany's already started that transition, and maybe there are some things that we can take from that lesson.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah. Bruno, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
No, please go ahead. You're closer geographically to the sectors.
No. I think again, every geography, different realities. So Canada is extremely rich in energy and all sorts. On the industry side, it's about efficiency. It's about finding what works best. But obviously in Germany, everything that we talked about has been driven by solid policies and solid vision for a while already. So that's probably a little bit behind, I would say, in Canada in terms of really dictating where do we want to go, and the next step is how do we want to go about it, leveraging what's around in the most efficient way. So I think coming back to Europe and in the case of Germany as well, if you look at the refining industry, there's been that renewable energy directive that has been really shaping some of the potential case use for the adoption of green hydrogen in the system. So I think this is just an example, but I think these things are probably a little bit behind when you start looking into Canada. Albeit it's been a while, I've been away, so I need to revise my my files there.
Yeah, Bruno. I think that's probably a very diplomatic observation. I think the something that I always like to teach my students or share with my students is, it's fundamentally different if you are in an energy exporter versus energy importer mindset. And I think it's good that we're talking about the sort of the Ruhr, and my colleague Petra Dolata should pipe in here too. She's willing to, when you're talking about sort of real regions, core regions that are so dependent on traditionally dependent on very energy intensive industrial processes, that are suddenly finding themselves in truly a climate of carbon constraints. And really, the way that I see it, the role that hydrogen will play in the German industrial sort of strategy going forward is really one of trying to modernize perhaps and preserve some of these key energy intensive sectors, the cement, the petrochemicals, even the steel manufacturing, and really see whether we can actually do something better with it, so that we really truly in earnest begin to talk about green steel, for example, and what that sort of involves. And whilst Germany might be ahead in that, I think it would also be a very good model for Canada to see, this whole interplay between sort of existing industry, what we can do in terms of decarbonization, and then actually resulting in a product that is more desirable and more attractive on a global market. And I think that with the Green Plan, the EU's Green Growth Plan, and everything that we're hearing coming out of Europe in terms of economic recovery generally, I truly see that this is going to be, hydrogen has true potential there in terms of really making a difference. And particularly, and I think Kirsten, you suggested this at the beginning, there are these key sectors that are just impossible or close to impossible to being electrified. So no matter how many electricity grids you build from north to south in Germany, it's not going to bring you that energy that you need for those sectors. Petra, are you with us in terms of the historical energy transitions?
Yes, I mean, one of the things that I would add to what you have already said and others, and I see also the comment here by Maggie Hanna about, obviously the whole issue of green versus blue hydrogen and these questions. I think what we see is that there are similarities in the way that now, and that was different in the 1970s when essentially hydrogen was discussed as something that was really sort of versus electrification, and was also something that was in response to the oil energy crisis. And so that was a slightly different situation than what we had today, where we really know that hydrogen is one of the many approaches that we need for decarbonizing. And this is something where decarbonization is something that the necessity to decarbonize is something that both Canada and Germany, of course, face. But as you already said, Rüdiger, there's a difference if you are a big oil and gas producer like Canada, or if you something else like Germany, but then you also have some very energy intensive industries. And so not surprisingly, we see slightly different prioritizations of the discussions, right? So I think it comes as no surprise that in the Canadian context, the focus is on how we can help oil and gas industry essentially transition. And here it's important to realize that the way that hydrogen is discussed is it's like the new natural gas. It's the new bridging, the new transitioning approach. But I think what will be important here is then to remember, we can talk about how we have German-Canadian collaboration in these areas, but we really have to sit down and ask ourselves, how complementary are really those interests? So there will be instances where I think it will be very challenging And I'm sorry, the historian is always the pessimist in the room. And we have seen
You help us stop making mistakes. That's good.
We have seen hydrogen hypes before. We have seen very close pledges or very important pledges to energy partnerships between Europe and Canada before. The 1976 Framework Agreement, the first agreement that the European community actually concluded with the developed country, was Canada. And it was because, the Europeans looked towards the energy resources that Canada had to offer. Did that make it a good partnership for increased trade in energy? Not necessarily, because Canada's interest was more to, create something along sort of not just being sort of a natural resource exporter. And I think it's the same challenge that we have at the moment. I see that Canada wants something slightly different out of its hydrogen strategy than Germany does. And I think we need to talk a bit more about what these expectations are, and also acknowledge that these expectations are societal. Canadians should not be surprised if Germans have massive hesitations if CCS is the big thing that is of course part of blue hydrogen. There will be most definitely a very hard-fought discussion about the use of CCS in Alberta to provide blue hydrogen. So there are a number of historical developments that help us understand where our societies stand as well in terms of social acceptance of some of these different color-coded hydrogens. I mean, the fact that the Canadians talk about clean hydrogen, the Germans talk about green hydrogen, that's not just semantics. There's a whole social, cultural, framework behind that.
Bruno, I wonder if we can ask you, why is it you think that this is not 1976? Why is it that it's different this time, and history, at least as it relates to hydrogen, will not repeat itself?
Well, again, I think we talked about that when we first met. I think the fundamentals have changed. Renewable energy is really at a different stage, and it really starts enabling a discussion where within the next decade or so, you will see hydrogen produced by renewable competitive with fossil-based technologies. So I think that's the most important dimension. After that, there's the necessity to and the realization that now it's time to do something with CO2. And as such, policies are really there and putting a framework that was not there in the past, right? So those two are really key. But I think it's really like when you take away all the policies that will differ from one region to another and will take into account some of the country or regional interest into some kind of a consideration. So taking these aside, it's all about the economics, and I think it's really the renewable that are really pushing this thing forward.
Yeah.
Maybe I have a additional point why it's different. We have spent so much money on renewables that we are, at least in countries like Germany, we are hitting the physical possibilities of the power grid. And to get these figures further up, we just need to find some other way. The challenge that we have certain situations, as you may know, where we have far more power, electricity in the grid already than we can actually consume. We're pushing this into other European grids or curtailing generation. But physically, I mean, we this is something I think in the German legal and in particular political debate isn't really discussed all that much. That these aims to get to whatever higher percentage of renewable energy, that we just need to find another way to do it. This is, I think, is very different. 1976. I mean, the renewables part started in 2000 in Germany, and now we've spent billions on all these renewables plants. We spent to spend even more billions on further renewables plants, but physically, if we have more than 100%, just needs to go somewhere. And I think that's, while only a part of that can go into hydrogen on the German or European end, I think the current figures are we need to import 90% or 85% of hydrogen from elsewhere to sort of make this work, to just make the consumption, the hydrogen consumption work. That this is I haven't heard another option how to actually get to those figures if we're not doing hydrogen. I think that's sort of an additional part that sort of, we're so far down that line, there's really no other way to go. I think that's what it looks like to me a bit.
I just wonder, and Dr. Kirsten Westphal has just had to leave us, unfortunately. But I just wonder, going back to Petra, what you said too, in terms of, I mentioned this partnership, and Matthias, if you're perhaps able to comment on, and Bruno too, from the industrial side, in the European discussion, is there a potential sort of issue with regard to Germany being perceived to be very much the sort of the driver of the green hydrogen discussion, and potentially sort of, I don't want to say alienating, potential partners like Canada, for example, but very much kind of sort of doing it on its own, and perhaps not looking at it in a larger European picture. And it's unfortunate that Kirsten had to leave us with her sort of Eastern European and Russian geopolitical expertise as well. But are we going to find ourselves in a situation basically where Germany sort of is sort of doing its own thing again?
Well, I suppose there's always a risk of that happening to some degree. But when we look at hydrogen, it seems to me that when you just look at the sort of, when we see the hydrogen strategy papers from the different European countries, from the European Union level, and now also the partnership with Canada, my impression is that the countries are really very close to each other, and this is a physical need to do this if we're going to get somewhere. And Germany is bound by the European developments. I mean, we have important European decisions coming up, be that on, well, somewhat esoteric terms of additionality requirements, sort of what is green, or what is acceptable hydrogen. How do you do it in the transportation sector? The taxonomy part, sort of what counts as sustainably produced hydrogen. A lot of that is really decided on the European level. And while Germany on the renewable energy front, when talk about power, was sort of a bit like at the beginning of 2000, sort of set up its Renewable Energy Sources Act to do that, and sort of had a bit of a state aid reserve sort of carved out for itself until sort of the German renewable energy industry got so big that Europe on the state aid side sort of interfered. Now it seems to me that there is a lot happening on the European level in the different European countries, and the wiggle room for Germany to sort of follow, well, to national or to particular interests is, my impression, smaller. And the drive to find an international approach to it is bigger. And the understanding of having to do something with other countries is bigger. So therefore, I think while there's always people thinking, well, if we do it by ourselves, that's easier and quicker, and let's do it that way. I think here on the hydrogen front, the international part is something that is very important. And you mentioned a report that we've done sort of in the firm where we looked at sort of different areas in Europe, where we tried to sort of look at who's doing what. And we did find indeed that there is quite a lot of commonality in the different countries. So I think there is, my guess at the moment is the likelihood of having something on a more international basis, Europe and above, is bigger than sort of a German individual solution.
Does it make sense though, Matthias, to have a Germany-Canada agreement on hydrogen? And does that to some degree run afoul of the sort of broader regional approach that presumably Germany will take? And if so, do we read this then as a green, to get back to Petra's comments, is this really a green sourcing agreement effectively as part of this broader collaboration, for which then blue can sit on the European market and be obtained indirectly by Germany? Is that a fair assessment of what the strategy is?
Well, I don't really know. I'm just a lawyer. But I think what we may have to come to terms with on the German end is the physics and the dimension that we're talking about. There is not enough German renewable PV and wind power to do this. So there is a need, when we look at the large quantities that the German and the European energy intensive companies are using, and if we're really going to do that, that has to come from somewhere. And Canada and everybody is looking for a way to do it. I think there is quite a lot of room for early mover advantages, and Canada is a country that has enormous resources and in every area, its brains, its power, its energy, and getting something done. I think and coming up with a viable solution, developing a viable solution, has a lot of pull once you have that. And if that's from Canada, or if that comes from Australia, or from any other country, as long as you are, able to come up with a solution to the challenge that we're facing, I think that there is, my personal view is, there's plenty of room to do that.
Are these concerns? May I ask Bruno? Are these concerns around the availability of sufficient hydrogen, given the strategies, the ambitious strategies we've seen in Europe, including the German strategy? Are there concerns that there simply will not be enough hydrogen, or enough hydrogen at a sufficiently low cost to make all of these ambitions, bring them into fruition?
That's a very good question. The cost point, I think we're all striving to reach a incumbent technology or TCO that is acceptable. So everybody talks about that $1 to $2 per kilogram of hydrogen. So I think there might be doubts on which pathways will reach that when. And as such, scaling is going to play a huge role there. But I think hydrogen, that's the beauty of it. Can come from many different ways, and as such, I think Germany, like other potentially net importer countries that we see, like Japan or Korea in the APAC region, are looking to map out and steer some activities in some more, I would say, energy rich regions of the sphere. So I think there's just, rightfully so, a lot of people trying to steer up a little bit the different pathways, the different production means, to see what's going to come and when at which price, right? So there's different roadmaps out there, and it's pretty much open, I think. But I don't, at the end of the day, I don't think there's going to be water missing or hydrogen missing if we all try to achieve that 18-20% of hydrogen in the energy landscape targets in 2050.
Yeah. But is there? And I think this is this $1 to $2 issue. I mean, is there sort of a bit of a wild west at present around trying to secure those low cost hydrogen long-term sources? I mean, is there sort of a competition occurring, sort of a covert
I would say
competition?
So.
Yeah,
I would say so. Yes. Yes.
Well, the somewhat cynical German approach is, no, it doesn't matter how much it costs. If it's more expensive, it's great. We feel better if it's more expensive. So I don't know.
Well, it's good that you mentioned that, Matthias, because Kirsten in one of the conversations with me, mentioned that the Germans are very much focused on the champagne of hydrogen at the moment, and I, of course, just stared right at her and I was like, what are you talking about, and it's sort of that very discerning, high quality, cost what it may, as long as it has the sort of the right credentials. I before we start talking about sort of the harvest season, I'm wondering, Bruno, if we could I could bring you in here and just perhaps get you to comment, please, on what is actually happening in Canada in terms of technological development, what role there might be for cooperation and pilot projects, for example. A cooperation on pilot projects, I should say, between Canada and Germany to just sort of, really get the technological side going as well, and what your company is doing on that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that's been active for quite some time, actually. So in Canada, we've got like pretty established fuel cell players in Ballard Power Systems in the West Coast, as well as with Hydrogenics, now Cummins. So they've been around for some time, and we're part of some, I would say, significant projects across the globe, but also along with Germany collaboration. So trains developed and manufactured by Alstom in Germany are powered by fuel cell technology from Canada. And on the other end, storage, onboard storage has been developed in Germany and will potentially be exported to Canada for that composite storage system. So I think on that end, we've seen some technology sharing in between both countries. When it comes down to pilot projects, I shared with you a link that there was already a vision to do export of clean hydrogen back in the 1990s from Quebec to Germany. So somebody mentioned the cycle was different. Things have changed, but the idea was around for quite some time. Now, in terms of pilot projects, we're aware of important projects in Quebec, where ThyssenKrupp landed a significant contract. It would be the largest electrolyzer when it's going to be pulled on in this new market, so around 100 megawatt there. So I think there's already a lot of things going on, so it's all about scaling that technology, and I think on both sides, obviously there's a lot of stakeholders interested in what both countries have to offer.
Perfect.
If I may just add something as the historian, because of course I'm aware of the Quebec European Community pilot cases. But the interesting thing is that in the 70s and the 90s, and even as you describe it now, it's the focus on fuel cell. It's the focus on, the car of the future, the transportation and all that. And I think what is different now is now we are looking at a lot more applications of hydrogen. We look at a lot more pathways.
Well said.
And all I can say as a historian is that sometimes we are trapped in our technological collaborative pathways. And it is no surprise that, of course, looking from Europe and from Germany, we probably focus much more on Quebec, on electrification, on fuel cells. But this is why I think we need to note, at least, if you read the Canadian hydrogen strategy, it almost leaves out Quebec and its significance. I mean, of course, it's in there, but it really places so much emphasis on oil and gas and blue hydrogen for various reasons. I mean, it's an important industry, it's many jobs, and this is why I think that has changed. And that also leads me to say that, unfortunately, it's not always all about the economics. There is a lot of politics involved, whether it's the geopolitics or the industrial politics side. And if it's Natural Resources Canada who's spearheading this, we shouldn't, of course, be surprised that there's such an emphasis, for example, on Alberta and oil and gas. And all I'm saying is that, we need to be aware of this, that maybe now, because of the way that hydrogen plays a much bigger role beyond fuel cells and mobility, there might be a slight mismatch in the way that Europeans historically look towards Canada when it comes to hydrogen, as opposed to what Canada itself is proposing. And of course, when you're in Alberta, the story is also very different.
I wonder, Petra, does the idea of a potential export of hydrogen in whatever form, whatever product, does it effectively put the Europeans, including the Germans, kind of inside Canada in terms of looking at how we produce these various products and how our environmental stewardship is being handled? Are we sort of now going to be under the microscope in a way that we perhaps weren't in the past?
I think so. I think if you read any of the sort of the discussions, particularly in the 1970s, we always focused on hydrogen as the actual fuel and how clean that is, and there's no question about that. But we didn't really look at what we now would consider, life cycle or assessments or the general carbon footprint, and that definitely has changed. And that's where I say, at least we need to communicate better, because you can expect the minute we talk about transporting by pipeline, transporting by ship, and even, this idea going through the Arctic and all these kind of things, they tie into existing debates that are already very challenging for Alberta jurisdictions, right? Because pipelines, CCS, all of that is really challenging in terms of social acceptance. And yes, I would expect that you actually, these practices will be much more under the microscope of a German, a public that is much more attuned and very quickly will, of course, make the linkages to oil sands and these things. We already had, had events with colleagues in Germany who immediately, when we talk about the importance of blue hydrogen, if we really are serious about net zero by 2050, were absolutely adamant that they would not be okay with this idea of putting, anything into CCS and carbon capture storage. Maybe it's a very German discussion as well. I think for Canadians, we always need to remind them that there's a long tradition of really opposing putting things down into the earth, whether it's nuclear waste or whether it's, you laugh, but I think these things are important, at least politically. And all I'm saying is that we need to be better at our PR, if you will. We need to be better at really talking through, and I know the Pembina Institute made that point. You need to talk to people. You need to explain to them the significance of oil and gas and blue hydrogen if we are serious about net zero by 2050. But we need to do this now and not, once we have all these technological solutions and infrastructure, and then act all surprised if people are completely opposed to it.
Yeah. Are we going to see, Matthias, are we going to see sort of a requirement that different products, hydrogen products, be sort of bear certain kinds of certifications and have certain kinds of provenance that can be verified before they're accepted within the German market? Is that coming, do you think?
So we're only going to accept champagne hydrogen.
From Ontario, yeah.
Well, yes and no. That's one of the things that's currently happening. When you look at what actually is green hydrogen, the color coding, there is actually no clear cut as yet existing classification scheme. In particular, I say, okay, well, how do you get to the various colors, and how is that done? So that there will be some form of classification for hydrogen, and some kind of certification system. The very interesting thing will be sort of what exactly will those certifications mean, and to what extent is Europe, in particular Europe, because most of the hydrogen itself will be a commodity traded within Europe. I personally don't see that technically the hydrogen itself, you can't move it from one place to the other, but that there will be certain requirements. There will be specifically on the hydrogen, how it's done, how you can demonstrate that, whether a certain power power purchase agreements to demonstrate it was done this way or the other way. So that, I think, is very much developing, and I think it's very important that Canada is also thinking about this and sort of being involved in that.
Yes.
And because there will be this requirement. And as you mentioned, clean is one thing, green is the other. We had this discussion with clean coal. This is a requirement that we need to deal with. But it can also go the other way. I mean, in Germany gets all excited about putting things in the ground, and for better or worse reasons, I suppose. And maybe it actually works the other way. If Canada can demonstrate, well, there actually is a viable option to do that. And while you may not believe it, and while you might be afraid of CO2 in the ground with CCS system, it actually does work, and it doesn't kill the cows and the people and whatnot. So there is, I think, room in both ways. There will be certification systems. So while it may not be champagne, but you have different versions. And I think it's very important to be on that. And we mentioned it at the beginning, standardization, be involved in the process, come up with good ideas, feed it into the process to actually also, I think, assist Europe and Germany for that matter, sort of not to get too single-mindedly focus on a maybe established way of thinking about it.
Bruno, you just posted the link to Certify, which is also something that is mentioned in the Canadian hydrogen strategy as an example, and there is emphasis on collaboration and Canada, interpreting this loosely, perhaps sort of not missing the boat on also playing a part in that discussion. Jonathan, you were saying?
I was going to ask Bruno, do you have thoughts on whether there may be different certifications for different sectors? In other words, could we see a transportation-specific certification around hydrogen that might be different than we'd see in the industrial sector or the heating sector, for example?
I think you want to avoid that. If not, then that's the big challenge, right? So along in the Certify project, I did participate in that, and that's an effort to develop a European-wide base, hopefully even further, of defining and agreeing to the colors of hydrogen and the value, and trying to implement some kind of a agreed upon guarantee of origin, and the goal of that, and the wider it is, the most meaningful it is at the end of the day, right? It's about comparing apples with apples, right? So
yeah.
But we're already seeing that this is starting to be difficult on the regulatory front. When we look at the transportation sector, for example, the reduction, the greenhouse gas quota discussion that we're having, to what degree can you have waste to energy plants waste to energy power being used for green hydrogen? How does the additionality requirement come into play in the different areas? Does it affect the color? Does it just affect the amount that you can put in there? So I think this may sound like a technical discussion, but to some degree, I think we are currently on the road to having actually different ways to calculate things and how to do that, whether that will affect the actual color or just the calculation of greenhouse gas reduction percentage. I don't know. I think it's a pretty much an open regulatory question where this is going to go, and we are currently waiting for proposals, delegated acts from the Commission to clarify certain elements of those qualifications.
Do you think, Matthias, it makes sense to have a hydrogen act, in other words, legislation within Europe that specifically addresses hydrogen as opposed to dealing with it indirectly through carbon pricing and carbon requirements?
Well, that is a bit of a difficult question for me. I'm a great fan of having a clear-cut statute setting out things that do make sense in their entirety. So like the German Civil Code in 1900. But the reality of today is probably difficult to do. So I think the realistic thing is that you see things in different places, and well, there is money in it for lawyers, I suppose, but trying to keep track of these things. Yes, it does make sense to have at least someone trying to keep things aligned. I'm somewhat skeptical that at the end of the day we will be doing it. I mean, we currently have so the beginning of the hydrogen laws in the Renewable Energy Directive recast, and the RED II directive. So that's kind of where it starts. Let's see where this is going to go, and where the hydrogen legislation is going to end up. I don't know. I would like it to be sort of in one good place. Let's see if that's going to be realistic. I somewhat doubt it.
Just on that discussion, there's a very interesting group based out of Brussels, and they prepared what they call the Hydrogen Act for the European Union. But very quickly and realistically, and I applaud them for being so candid. They recognize, that this is very, very different. And I think the Bird and Bird report, Matthias, too, recognize that this is no longer just a question of, are we building up a renewable energy industry, and what kind of infrastructure do we need for that? But this now with hydrogen really is both an infrastructure question in terms of renewable, the electricity, the existing natural gas pipelines, the import terminal, that kind of angle. And then at the same time, really having to sort of create this whole new market as well in terms of, everything we've discussed, harmonization of standards, guidelines, quality, safety, purity, all of those kind of things. So it's really this sort of big beast model, isn't it, that we're really dealing with, rather than just a one sort of convenient flicking the switch and saying, let's replace, coal with natural gas, for example. I don't know if that's a realistic assessment, but it's certainly something that I think that's quite interesting to discuss.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, I share the concern, as I mentioned, that it's pretty unrealistic to do it. And the way these things work is you have things here, there, and there, and you have to try to keep making sense of it. Be that as the be academia trying to keep making sense of it, or the lawyers trying to advise their clients do that, or actually the in-house teams at the clients, sort of to focus, keeping track of what they're doing. I think that's just the reality. But it's also an advantage because it allows us to look at different things in different countries and different speeds in different countries. So while conceptually it's nice to have that clean cut solution, having it somewhat meandering perhaps gives the option to try things out in an area where we don't quite know how we're supposed to do things.
Is there a concern, Bruno? I wonder from your end, is there a concern that at some point the certainty in the market will be replaced by an overly prescriptive set of regulations? In other words, that the market itself will lose some of its dynamism if we go from creating a stable floor to being overly normative as to exactly how this hydrogen market should work?
Right now, I think we're still looking for strong policies to go and alleviate some of that delta cost on incumbent technologies. So as far as regulation and codes and standards related to the technology, I think they've been out there, at least in Canada. Canada been a front runner on to normalize a lot of the T's and C's, sorry, not the T's and C's, but the regulation codes and standards around the application of technology around hydrogen. It's still very conservative at this stage. It's still a very small let's say industry so far. So at the end of the day, they've taken probably very conservative position on some of this based on the application use that were industrial, so the legacy industrial application use. So on that end, I think progress is in the making. It's about getting it's about following and making sure that things are done right, and before they kind of make it little bit more less conservative. I think it takes time. It takes bringing everybody up to speed. But on the global politics, I still think that there's some room to make stronger policies to really still drive that, because we've got a clear roadmap for the next decade. Still, after that first phase of pilots that we're going to go through in the next couple of years or so, there's probably going to be okay, now we've seen, we raised it to the 100 megawatts, to 200 megawatts. Now, in order to get to the 1 gigawatt, somebody's got to put that billion-ish investment on the ground. So they'll be looking for a little bit more than just what's out there today.
Yeah. I wonder if that maybe Petra, I wonder if you have thoughts on when we look at the past, and we're talking ultimately about a carbon market to some degree. I mean, obviously hydrogen has an intrinsic value in a number of applications, but part of what is being bought and sold are the environmental attributes. And when we look at carbon markets in the past, we've seen some success, and then we've seen some adjustments and maybe some lack of confidence around the sort of verification and the effectiveness of some of those projects. Do you think there's a concern that if the regulation perhaps doesn't come quickly enough, or there's not enough certainty in the market, that there could be some loss of confidence at some point down the road if we're not careful in terms of what exactly is a clean or a green hydrogen?
I would say in general, now is definitely the time that Canada inserts itself into these international discussions on certification and life cycle assessment and all this, because they do have something to contribute from their very unique situation, but also with their long history, not only, of course, fuel cell technology, but also, of course, with CCS and steam methane reforming and all these kind of things that are, of course, that are an integral part of this. So on the one hand, I really hope that Canada uses this partnership to also, and I think they already do, we hear this coming out of Natural Resources Canada, that they really talk about, okay, we rather want to talk about clean, what would be the kind of certifications that we would look into. And so I think now is the time where you really want to have these kind of discussions, because you need, as you said, you probably need a less restrictive way of talking about these. On the other hand, I think we haven't talked about the US at all. And I think you cannot look at Canada and where Canada will be going with hydrogen without also acknowledging that, of course, it's always an integrated energy market in terms of the North American example. So I think what we really haven't talked about, what Canada could also play a role with, that they bring in the US in terms of they have a long-lasting relationship and have to deal with the US and changing jurisdictions and, of course, very different policies. So one of the things that I think will be important as well is to from the European side to rather understand where the US is heading with their Canadian partners, if that makes any sense. I sometimes feel that has proven quite successful historically, while as Europeans probably we also need to acknowledge that still the biggest market for the Canadians will remain the United States. We all talk about possible exporting to Asia and Europe, but the easiest, of course, will always remain for Canada, the United States, while at the same time, we will also be massively impacted the fewer oil and gas is used in the United States. I think as some people have mentioned, the Canadian hydrogen strategy is assuming things that don't necessarily play out if we expect that the United States will actually decarbonize much quicker as well. So I think as a historian who has looked at the 1970s and then also at the 1990s, I would always warn when we discuss energy partnerships between Europe and Canada to not include the US case, to not understand how that will actually complicate possibly matters. On the other hand, I think Canada should really step up, and as Kirsten mentioned, within a G7 or G20 context, really talk about what are the best institutions for looking at standard certifications and all that, but also bring in the experience of an oil and gas producer of an energy-rich country into those discussions, which will also legitimize, I find, any European initiative. Because, I mean, the Russians will look at this. They certainly, in terms of being a massive gas producer, will be very interested in those discussions themselves, I would assume.
Maybe as an additional point, I note here in the chat that the figures, the cost of hydrogen, is an issue. That is actually something that Canada can very much bring to the discussion in Germany and in Europe. We are so excited about getting all these regulatory things done, and sort of Germany has so much money to spend on this idea that we sometimes lose sight of how much this all costs because we can afford to do it. A bit of a cynical approach, perhaps, but how much does it actually cost? Is it efficient to do? We talk about establishing markets, but looking at it from the renewable energy side, we sort of developed a habit of developing renewable energy outside of the market and the market perspective. And is there a way to do this and to do this perhaps more efficiently? And how much do things cost? How much do they have to cost? Even taking into account the cost of shipment from Canada to Europe, to Germany. I think that's a perspective that I personally don't see much in the German and the European discussions. Yes, yet maybe 10 times as much from the green hydrogen, but how much is it really? How much can you do? What is doable? And what quantities are doable? I think Canada would have a big role to play and say, okay, this is actually something that we think we can do in 5 years, and probably the cost would be pretty much this. And this then will be a benchmark also for a market.
Matthias, I think that's a super realistic assessment in terms of the Canadian sort of deliverables as well. And we've seen this, in terms of any energy infrastructure development in Canada is, Petra, you mentioned pipelines. It's very difficult at the moment. And so I think that's certainly something that's more than important to flag for the European side as well, that, just because the Germans and the Europeans are looking towards Canada, there is no guarantee, there is no absolute guarantee that the ships are also going to start, moving across the Atlantic. And there has to be, a very realistic sort of angle to this. There's a LNG project in Nova Scotia that's been, in the discussion for a number of years. Very, very attractive contracting with Uniper as well. And, the whole pipeline question, the whole sourcing of the natural gas, the whole export infrastructure, all of those are sort of wrinkles that really have not been perhaps sort of discussed as much at the European side of things, and I think that ties back to the earlier comment of how reliable is also this potential partnership between Canada and Germany, with a view to what Canada can actually deliver to the German and European hydrogen markets. It's always, I think, worth talking about potential risks to then factor those into any of the discussions. I'm conscious of the time, Jonathan. I wonder if you've got any more comments or questions to our panel.
I just wanted to pick up on one thing Petra was mentioning in terms of looking at the United States, and I wanted to ask Bruno around the transportation sector and maybe more specifically around fuel cells and what the integration between Canada and the United States may mean in terms of our ability to have a viable transportation sector moving as quickly as it appears to be moving into hydrogen, and maybe just maybe what that means in terms of our relationship with the EU and Germany.
Oh, yeah. So relative to transportation, so I think there's been, yeah, I think somebody brought up a big difference also from the previous cycle on the hydrogen. All the focus was towards this application of transportation, and it's, again, I think there's reason for that, because it talks to people and engage with people, and everybody relates to mobility. I think hydrogen will play a huge role in mobility, but it's a tougher nut to crack to start with. So that's why I think we talked about other things. But coming back to what works and what not, I think California has been leading the way in terms of setting up with those zero emission ZEV mandate states. So they really, and I think Canada has been following along with some of other states to embrace this. So British Columbia, I believe, and then Quebec have somewhat adopted the ZEV, or at least a portion of it, where you are prescribing for that given region some quotas around the offering of your vehicle. So everybody that wants to sell a vehicle in this state or this region needs to do so, and you have a certain ranking based on the technologies that you're providing. So that's been really working for mobility. On the other end, in Germany, we've seen also H2 mobility, where they decided to take away that chicken and egg dilemma and really commit creating kind of a joint venture nationwide, where some key stakeholders align together, join forces, and decide, you know what, along with the government, we're going to create this entity, not really looking at making money at the beginning, just to make sure that we have the right network. So I think what can we take from Germany, or work with Germany on this? It's that nationwide infrastructure thinking, and start probably with, I would say, easier case use, such as heavy duty transportation, or for instance, like in Germany, the train application, so the regional train application, where you have fleet-based application that are coming back, yet as such you have less a need for I would say a bigger, wider infrastructure rollout, which is at the end difficult to do in terms of time, because of jurisdiction and permitting and all of this sort, but also from a pure economic bet. So I think it's about probably spending the time to really outline what are the key transportation means or case use that are better served with this technology, and try to focus on these. And I think that's been done a bit with LNG as well. So those high heavy duty transportation corridors, that's something we've seen being looked into in the past. So I think the same here should be done for hydrogen, and that would go a long way, right?
Maybe just to add to that, when we've been talking about the sort of bigger infrastructure, the electrolyzer part, I think the mobility part is where we have some sort of rather smaller projects, but they're very important. When I look at the roadmap, the hydrogen roadmap in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, say, okay, by 2025, we want 400 fuel cell trucks, 200 hydrogen stations, and 60 stations for personal transportation. And then by 2030, we want, 11,000 fuel cell trucks and 200 hydrogen stations for trucks, and 1,200 or 1,000 trucks to collect waste driven by hydrogen. So having sort of smaller things in a regional sort of manageable chunk, state of North Rhine-Westphalia, hydrogen roadmap, sort of implementing things, but working on sort of more smaller projects to actually get them done. I think that's an important part. And again, where sort of the international industries can look into, okay, we produce these trucks, we do that, and then sort of take it from there, and let's see how the other things develop in the meantime.
Yeah.
Excellent. Jonathan, anything else in terms of two-way impulses across the Atlantic, like we just heard in terms of the on this discussion today? Any final comments from our panel members in terms of developing further collaborations and a potential market across the pond? Is there anything that perhaps we should briefly just discuss in terms of the existing infrastructure in Europe, the differences in the natural gas pipelines, the questions of repurposing of these pipelines, so that in the event that the European and certainly the German and Netherlands sort of hydrogen market really gets going, it can actually really accelerate rather quickly too, given the existing sort of infrastructure that is there. Matthias, do you have a final thought on that in terms of regional Netherlands, Germany kind of import routes into the Ruhr, for example? Some of those discussions.
Well, I think that what I find is everybody talks about hydrogen at the moment. Nationally, we have that at the European level, we have that at the federal level, at the state level, we have the municipal waste trucks. That's happening. We have that between Germany and the Netherlands. As you know, several companies, actually the networks go from one country to the other. So there's a lot happening. I think we currently have a lot of interest in the sector, but developing doable projects. I think that's something that's happening. The Netherlands is actually quite good at doing that. There are various initiatives in Germany doing that, and I imagine there are various initiatives in Canada. And as we do not have like 20 years of time to get this done, I think it's very important to continue and accelerate the exchange of ideas. Who is doing something? Where are things working? Previously, we had 30 years to develop an infrastructure. No, we talk about 5 years, 10 years, and we need something doable, and that cannot be done in one place. So I think getting this done and sort of building on the MOU for the energy partnership between Canada and Germany, I think is an excellent initiative to exchange ideas, see how things are done, and broaden the horizon. I think that's the key part where we should all work towards.
Yeah, and I think, Rudiger, there's a real sense that anything that has worked will be replicated quickly and repeatedly. So I think there's a real premium on proving out applications, deployments in ways that'll work internationally.
And really sort of embedding those mutual interests, those mutual Canadian, German, European interests in this partnership as well. And as you said, wonderful.
Maybe if I can just add, because
the
CBC had just last week sort of a whole, I think a 40-minute thing on hydrogen. And of course, what we can also do with that partnership is that the Canadian side can point out the Germans put a lot more money into this. So I think it's also something where, as Canadians, as citizens, we may also ask our government, we have a hydrogen strategy, but we don't have the kind of money. We don't even have like a, technological or industrial policy that is fully funded by the Canadian government. So I'm hoping that the MOU leads at least, everyday Canadians also to asking for more. How serious are we about this? Is Ballard still, California is much more important as a market than is any of the Canadian provinces, right? So I think that's what I'm also hoping from the MOU, that it's a wake-up call for Canadian citizens who want to see us moving towards net zero and changing mobility.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we're a long way from Champagne in Canada, a long way.
Wonderful. Okay, Jonathan, thanks for your final thoughts on that. Thank you to the panel members for your invaluable thoughts and your time. We really appreciate it. I think this is the first of an installation that we're doing together with Jonathan and BLG and also with my colleague Dr. Petra Dolata. The next session will be later on in May on what is happening in the Asian region, in particular in terms of Japan. Very interesting in terms of the transportation side of things as well. And then we'll be returning later on in the summer to a very interesting discussion in terms of what what industrial activity, what companies, what small medium enterprises in Germany and in Canada are really driving this hydrogen discussion. So please stay tuned for that, and we'll be happy to send you out any further details. For my part, thank you very much for your attendance this morning. I hope you enjoyed it, for the excellent and fantastic insights from the panel members, to Jonathan and BLG for your support, and also to Peter and Ali, our UCalgary team, for assisting us in organizing today's event. With that, those are my thoughts. Thank you very much. Jonathan, anything from you?
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much to everyone who participated.
Much appreciated. Thanks for your time. Good morning, all. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.